Well, hello there, folks. I'm Mike Mavell. I'm a photographer, videographer in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I've been doing Photoshop work since 1993. I wasn't really working then. I was still in school, but I was learning Photoshop in about 1993 in Photoshop 3. So I've been at this for a while. I know Photoshop pretty well, and thought I'd just show you guys some Photoshop stuff along the way. I do photography and videography now, and knowing these skills and being efficient at them has really helped me to kind of grow what I do and really become who I am today with my commercial business. So come along, and today we're going to start off with some Photoshop basics. I'm going to do a series on Photoshop basics for the next few weeks. Today's going to be real basic. I'm going to start off with menus, and I might touch on just opening a file and stuff like that. So super basic stuff. And you know, over the next few weeks we'll talk about tools and menus and stuff like that. So hope you join me and come along for the next few weeks, and eventually we'll get to some more experience type Photoshop work and Photoshop manipulation. But for now, I'm going to keep it super basic. I think everybody should know these basics, kind of know what is in Photoshop and what you can use it for, just because that is kind of how you become efficient with programs and stuff like that, so you can work a bit quicker. You know, I used to shoot a lot of weddings, and so, you know, when I would go through all of them in Photoshop, I would have thousands of photos to go through. So I became really quick at it, and knowing what capabilities are out there as well also helps, so you can not be stuck thinking, well, how am I going to do that, or how is that done? You'll kind of have some of the tools and be able to get yourself there, because there are plenty of different ways to do the same thing in Photoshop. So without further ado, here we go. Let's get into it. All right, so I am using Adobe Photoshop CC 2019. I just updated it the other day, so it should be pretty up to date. You'll see when you log in, it comes up to this screen. You can just close that. I'm going to show you another way to open stuff. When you open Photoshop, you can go one of two ways to open things. File, open, which will bring you up to a browser window like this, or if you're on a Mac, and by the way, I'm going to be just talking in Mac terms from here on out, so let me just get that out of the way. But on a Mac, you can grab the file out of your folder, drag it down to your icon, and if you don't hold on to it too long, it'll just let go and it'll open up in Photoshop. The other thing, if you're on a Mac, I just want to make you aware of, if you do a get info, file, get info, or Command I on the file itself on your desktop, there's a thing here that says open with. Now, most photos, if they're JPEGs, will want to open in whatever basic photo program comes on the Mac. Let me take a look here real quick. Image capture or something like that. But what you can do is you can go here to open with, set it to Photoshop, and hit change all. So anytime you go to open that type of file, JPEG or TIFF or whatever, it will automatically launch in Photoshop. Just a little extra tip there for you Mac people. All right, so with file open, and I'm going to go through the menu and kind of show you what some of these things do. So under Photoshop CC, you have About, which just gives you basic information about Photoshop. You have About plugins, which we have a plugin for Camera Raw, and we'll get to that eventually. Preferences for all the different things in Photoshop. I'm not going to go through these right now, but I will eventually. I'm just kind of going through the menus quick so you know what's in each menu to begin with. Services, you don't have to worry about that. You can hide Photoshop. These are basically Mac functions, or quit Photoshop is under Photoshop CC. Now under the File menu drop down, you have New. You can create a new file that's blank. You can set it up for whatever sizes you need. As you can see, I've got it set here for doing video work, 1920 by 1080, which is 1080p file size, pixels. And you can browse in Bridge. So if you have Bridge downloaded, you can browse in Bridge, and it's one way to work. I don't typically do that because I use Lightroom for all of my other browsing and stuff like that. So open as a smart object. What that does, and I'll kind of get into smart objects a little bit further down the line, it's a bit more advanced. Smart objects allow you to do things that like add filters and things like that that are non-destructive. So if you open an image as a smart object, it'll open with a, and we'll get into layers, but it'll open as a layer that's not locked. Like on over here, you can see there's a little lock button on this layer, but it'll open up without that being on. It won't say, it will say probably layer 0, and then it will allow you to do those smart object options like filters and things like that that are non-destructive. Open recent, so anything you've opened before is right there. Close all, so if you have multiple windows open, you can close them all at the same time. Close and go to Bridge. These are pretty self-explanatory for most of these. Export, there are some different export features. You can quick export to PNG, you can export as, and that will bring this up and give you options to export in different formats, things like that. You can save for web, which is kind of a legacy feature, which is now kind of export as. You can change your export preferences. And then turn layers to files. So if you have multiple layers in your image, you can save them out as their own file. Color lookup tables, we're not going to really touch on that right now. Paths to Illustrator, so if you have paths and you know Illustrator at all, they're the same kind of thing, and you can export those paths to Illustrator for their own use. And Zoomify, which is an export feature, which we're not going to really touch on because I don't think it's that important. We're only going to go to the important ones that I use most for most photographers. Share, I mean, if you want to share to, you know, Lightroom or Mail or email or Facebook or whatever else you want to share to, you can do that on a Mac here. Search Adobe Stock. So if you want stock photos, you can go right there. You can place embedded or place linked. So place embedded means it will embed the file that you're placing into the picture and come up with this little thing right here. So you can then go and you can edit that image by itself, and it'll reopen that image in its own window. Whereas, oh, I closed the wrong one. Nope, gotta delete this layer. Whereas embed linked, it will embed a linked version, which you can also open. They're basically the same thing. They're not that much different, except for the linked one it draws off of wherever you have it saved, and the embedded one actually embeds the image in the file that you're working on. So that's kind of the difference. Other than that, working wise, they're not really that different. Automate, you can automate things here. This is where you can create batch processes off of your actions, and we'll get into actions and batching and stuff like that later. You can create PDFs. You can create contact sheets for multiple big shoots and stuff like that. So you can create a PDF contact sheet right here in Photoshop if you don't have like Lightroom or any other processing if you don't have any other processing software or something like that. So Photoshop can take care of that right there for you. So if you have to send out a PDF of a bunch of images, you can send a contact sheet. It's a lot quicker and easier. Crop and straighten photos, like I said, contact sheet. We can do lens correction. So if most cameras nowadays have all of the photo information embedded into the file, the EXIF data, it's called, and you can set Photoshop to change and to correct for whatever lens you're using. So you just kind of have to like bring in a profile for your lens, and it will do that. Lens merge to HDR. So if you took a bunch of photos that are HDR'd, you can do a merge to HDR right here. You can do photo merge, which kind of pushes a bunch of photos together and allows you to you can do stuff like panoramas and things like that. They changed it to photo merge instead of panorama a while back. And that's kind of it in there. Scripts, you can write, if you know how to write scripts, you can write scripts in Photoshop. Importing videos from video frames to layers. So if you have a video clip you're working on and you want to import them as layers, so you can tweak each individual layer, you can do that. You can import from devices, so like a card reader or a camera. And you can make notes. File info kind of gives you the information of your file. This is a pretty important piece right here. So this actually is where all of your EXIF data is this is where all of your EXIF data is stored. So right here, I can click on camera data, and I shot this on my 5D Mark IV, and on a 50mm 1.4, it gives you all the when I shot it, 100th of a second, f1.4, ISO 250, gives you all that information. When it was shot, the date. You can add in descriptions and all of your contact information if you want to, and you can set the terms and copyright notices in here. So this is where you do that. All your raw data, if you can understand all of that jibber jabber. Yeah, so this is where all of that data is stored. This is where all your EXIF data is. So that is file info. You can print and print one copy, pretty self-explanatory. Edit, this is where you undo things. You can undo or redo. So if I make this layer, if I duplicate this layer, so I have a second layer, you'll now see I can undo duplicate layer. If I undo that, you can see that layer goes away. And now I have redo duplicate layer. So you can undo and redo right here. Toggle last state. So the state has to deal with history, but we'll get into that in another tutorial. Search, check spelling. So if you're typing a lot, you can check spelling there. Find and replace text. Perspective warp. So this allows you to drag any lines here to fix the warp in any perspective stuff you have going on in an image. All right. And a lot of these are going to be grayed out for the moment. I'm just going to double click and make this a layer 0 just for now, so we can see a little bit more of some of these things that are going on. Content aware scale. We'll get into that a lot more. But it allows you to scale an image, and it will try to keep everything in proportion with the subject. It's a really bizarre thing, and I'd never use it, honestly. Perspective warp. Oh, sorry, that was one we just talked about. And then there's, oh no, I did talk about it. So then there's puppet warp. For puppet warp, I like to use make a selection, and we'll get into selections and copying and pasting later, but for now I just want to show you what it does. Puppet warp brings up this funky grid. It's just crazy, and you can put little dots in there, these little pins they're called, and you can, those pins lock those little spots in place. So if you put those there, and we'll go right around his head, so that none of his, if you get too close, it'll tell you, so that none of his jacket and his head move at all. But say you wanted to drag this point right here somewhere, you can then move it, and it will try and keep the best it can for some of this stuff. And if not, you can just put another point and drag it back. So then when you hit enter or return, you can see it pulls all that and keeps most of everything else where it's supposed to be. So that is puppet warp. That's actually probably one of my favorite tools. Perspective warp. warps on the perspective, kind of similar to Puppet Warp, but we'll get into that later. But Puppet Warp I wanted to tell you about because that's my fave. So Free Transform gives you these little handles, and I'll pull this out so you can see it. So you can transform, and it holds the scaling for you. If you hold Shift down, it will try to like squish or squash it for you. If you hold down Option and do it, it kind of pulls it all the corners in together, which is my favorite. They actually just changed that, and I had to relearn it. It's crazy. And if you hold Shift and Command down, it'll just drag one point, so you can make it on a perspective or a plane or something like that. If you just hold Option down, it just drags that one point along the edge to perspective. So those are the different things you can do with Free Transform, and holding down key commands. So you can also then transform. There's different ways you can transform: by scale, rotation, skew. We'll get into those later. Warp. You can rotate things in here. Rotate 180, 90, flip horizontal or vertical. Purge is for all your histories. You can purge all those. Presets. This is where your preset manager is. Sorry, we're getting a little long on time here, so I'm going to kind of speed up. Your color settings and profiles, to kind of help determine where you need to send this. So if you're sending to web, it's going to be one color profile. If you're going to send to print, it's going to be another color profile. So that's where you can go to see that. This is where you can assign the profile. You can actually change it here. The other one's just viewing. Convert to a profile. Again, converting the color space of an image. Keyboard shortcuts. This is where you can actually change shortcuts, so you can see all of them. So Command N is new, but if you want it to be something else, you can click on it and you can type in whatever you want it to be. There's that. Menus, same thing here, and toolbar as well. You can change toolbar letters as well. But for what we're doing, I'm just going to go over the basic ones that come in Photoshop. And if you want to change them, you can do whatever you want. Image mode. This is where you change the color. So if you are working in RGB for web and you need to change and see what it's going to look like in CMYK or send it to a printer, you can change it to CMYK here. Lab is good for doing some different things. We'll get into that later. Multi-channel, you can change to 16 or 32 bits, and grayscale if you want to make something black and white. Adjustments. I'm not going to go through all the adjustments now, but I'm going to have a full one on just adjustment layers. Wait for that. That's going to be fun. And this is where you can change colors and stuff like that. And adjustments are great. Don't worry. Auto tone, auto contrast, color. Those are auto features I never use. If you're just starting and want to use an auto feature, go for it. But if you learn the real features, you'll never want to use auto. Image size, this is pretty important. This is where you can change the image size, and we'll get into that. I'll probably do almost a whole tutorial just on image sizing because it can be pretty complicated, but we'll try and break it down for you. Canvas size, so you can actually change the size of the whole canvas that goes around the image, which doesn't actually change the pixels or the dimensions of the pixels. So right here it's at 14.933. We can change it to 16. And you'll see that there's extra space along the edge now. Undo that. You can trim things if you have it selected. Reveal all. You can duplicate to a second version if you want, whatever state you're in. Apply image calculations. I don't really use a ton of that. So layers. Create a new layer, new background from layer, new group. So this is where all your layer stuff is, and we're going to do a whole thing on layers and layer masks, a full one on layer masks, and a full one on adjustment layers themselves, because they are pretty awesome. And then we're going to do we'll talk about layers in general, and then we're going to do tons of different stuff on layers. So layers, it's going to be its own tutorial. Hold on for layers. It's a beast, but this is where you do all layer work here. Type, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is where you do type stuff, and you can find fonts and do different things with type. we're not going to get into that too much today. Select, this is where your selections come from. So you can do selecting by all layers. So when we get into layers, and you'll see why this becomes important for those types of things. You can isolate layers. You can select by color range. So when this pops up, if you want to just select anything blue, you bring up this little eyedropper, you click on the blue, and then you can adjust this fuzziness to kind of bring in more, and then you can add more by doing this add one, and then kind of do more contrast, and then it gives you a selection, which you can work off of. It's pretty helpful. Focus area, which will just select on things that are focused, or it tries to the best it can. And it will select and mask. So there's a selection on just the stuff that's in focus. Select and mask, I'll probably do a whole one on just that. It's crazy by itself. Edit in quick mask mode. We'll get to quick mask, don't worry. Filters, so this is where all your fun filters are. 3D stuff. Blurs, Gaussian blur is probably the most used blur by anybody, but I have been using surface blur, motion blur, and lens blur a lot lately. They're all pretty good. Blur gallery, which is, it'll bring up its own whole gallery and you can kind of see the blurs as you're doing things. Distort gives you different distort options for pinching and twirling and things like that. Noise, you can add or reduce noise. There's some pretty powerful stuff in here. Just dust and scratches I use all the time. Pixelate, you can add pixelated type looking things and feel to your stuff. And render, you can render clouds, fibers, lens flares, lighting effects. A lot of cool stuff in render. Sharpening, unsharp mask is probably all I use out of this whole thing. Although I did use shake reduction the other day, and I will tell you, it was pretty impressive. So we'll go over that too. Stylize, this adds more just kind of different things. And stylizing, sometimes you can use it to get effects to kind of add tones and just little bits of noise and things like that that you might need. They can be helpful. Good to know they're there, but I'll go over them eventually. Video is for video filters. Other, high pass, maximum, minimum. We'll go over them a little bit, but I don't really use them that much, and there's not much there. 3D. So 3D, you can really kind of do what you need to in 3D if you're a 3D person. Not really helpful for photo that much. View. You can zoom in, zoom out, make things different sizes to see. Just different sizes to see on screen. This is not making changing the image size or anything like that. Proofing things for pixel aspects and things like that. Making guides, stuff like that. Rulers, showing your rulers on your screen. But this is just to view in the program. Window. So this is where all of your windows are, and we're going to have a whole thing on just windows and what's in these windows. That'll probably be the next video we do. But as you can see, actions, brushes, channels, character stuff for type, history, layers, layer comps. There's just a ton of stuff in here, and we're going to kind of go through it eventually. So this was a basic one today, kind of going through. And also help in here. If you need Photoshop help and you're on the internet, you can get right to the help from Adobe. But this is today's basic start on just file menus. So hopefully you kind of learned where a few things were. Maybe you were just like, wow, I don't know where to do a color selection, but I've heard you can. Hopefully I just showed that to you and that's helpful. We're going to do stuff on a whole one on just selections. We're going to do a whole one on channels, paths, all the different windows and stuff like that. So hang in. There's going to be a lot over the next few months, especially in Photoshop. And then once we're done with Photoshop, move over to Lightroom and get some tips and learn some stuff in there. So if you like this, stay subscribed down below, ring the bell, and you'll know when we have new Photoshop stuff up or other tutorials. And I'm going to do some photography stuff and video stuff. So stay tuned and come along for the ride. Again, I'm Michael Maville with MM Visuals. That's mmvisuals.com, and you can find my Instagram and Facebook, and come check me out there. So, all right, have a good one for now, and we'll see you next time.